So today I'm going to talk to you about endpoint assessment because it's an item in the new apprenticeship arrangements that I get a lot of questions and queries about, but also there's been some changes to endpoint assessment funding rules from the original draft funding rules which were published in October last year and the new final published funding rules which came out in early February. So what are those changes? Well, the first change is that originally in October the Skills Funding Agency stated that the cost of endpoint assessment should be approximately no more than 20% of the maximum funding band for whichever apprenticeship was being delivered. But in the new funding rules which were published in February, it states that the maximum cost approximately for endpoint assessment should be no more than 20% of the negotiated funding rate for the apprenticeship. Now there's several issues with that. The first one being that if an employer and provider negotiate the rate down quite a bit from the original maximum funding band of an apprenticeship, one of the things they really need to do before they agree that rate is make sure that any endpoint assessment organisation they're going to use is happy to have that rate, have the 20% of that rate as the cost of their endpoint assessment. Inevitably, there are associated costs with delivering endpoint assessment, and some of those costs can be quite high for any endpoint assessment organisation you choose to deliver your end assessment. So you have to make sure, if you do negotiate the rate down, that you ensure your endpoint assessment organisation is willing to deliver end assessment for the rate you've negotiated, or at least 20% of that rate that you've negotiated. So be very clear to ensure that your end assessment organisation is included in those initial negotiations and they're happy with that rate, whatever it may be. But the other question I often get asked mainly by employers, but occasionally by providers, is why should we bother with end assessment at all? If the apprentice has done all of their learning and we know that they've achieved the apprenticeship and all the skills and behaviours and knowledge and competencies they've got to do, or they've got to learn as part of that apprenticeship have been achieved, why should we bother to pay for end assessment? Why should we bother to use our levy for end assessment? Well, there are three different reasons for this, so let's talk about it from a provider point of view. First of all, the achievement of that apprenticeship is going to show on provider achievement rates, which also shows on the performance data, which shows up on the Find an Apprenticeship Provider search tool that's on the Digital Apprenticeship System, Digital Apprenticeship Service, which is now called the Apprenticeship Service. So what will happen is, if providers agree that an end assessment isn't needed, and they do that with a series of employers, what could happen is that, or what will happen is that will show in their final achievement rates, which will show up on their performance data, and that could influence other employers who are approaching them thinking, well, actually their achievement rates for apprenticeships aren't very good, so I'm not going to use them as a provider, I'll use this provider over here. So it could have an effect on the future business for that provider. Then let's look at it from an employer point of view. The new apprenticeship system is going to provide a vast quantity of the skills and knowledge that we need in the various sectors across our country for the future of business in this country. We are going to need a higher level of skills, particularly post-Brexit, when we're not going to have access to some of the skills that we brought across from Europe. We're going to need to develop our own learners and our own employees with the skills and technical skills that we need going forward into 2020 and beyond. So having a good quality apprenticeship system that also includes end assessment is going to become increasingly important. And as employers and providers and as awarding organisations and end assessment organisations, it's really down to us to make sure that the apprenticeship system going forward is a good quality system that enables employers to have a skilled pool of candidates with a certificated apprenticeship that they're able to recruit from if they're not recruiting an apprentice further on in the future. So if you were an employer and you were doing a recruitment exercise in 3 or 4 years' time, and you had a couple of candidates at the end of your recruitment drive, and they were both apprentices, but one of them was holding a certificate and the other one wasn't holding a certificate, which apprentice are you more likely to take on? You're going to take on the one that has the apprenticeship certificate that says, I've definitely gained these skills, knowledge, competencies and behaviours. And then finally there's the outcome for the learner. What is the reputation of any employer or provider going to be if they put someone through an apprenticeship and at the end of that apprenticeship they say, we're not going to bother to pay for your end assessment, so you're not going to get a certificate that says you've achieved this apprenticeship. So from the learner point of view, they need that certificate to be able to go on and develop their career going forward, so they can show that certificate to any future employer saying these are the skills and qualification and the knowledge and the competencies I've got, but also from a point of view of what that apprentice may say about the provider and the employer going forward in terms of, well, I went there and I did an apprenticeship, they weren't going to bother to pay for my apprenticeship certificate and my endpoint assessment, so I don't have a certificate to show for it. So there's a whole multitude of issues there around end assessment, which basically is about the quality of end assessment, the reputation of the employer and the provider, the performance data for the provider on end assessment, and the final outcome for the learner, which is really important. They're able to demonstrate that they have done an apprenticeship and they've got those skills and that knowledge and those competencies and those behaviours going forward for their career in the future. And then there's the quality, as I said before, of the whole apprenticeship system that we are all going to be responsible for. And it's really down to us to make sure that that apprenticeship system is a quality system. And endpoint assessment is a key factor in the quality of that system going forward. And if we want the system to work, we are all responsible for making sure that end assessment forms a key part of apprenticeships going forward into the future for our skills, for our economy, and for our us as individual organisations and our reputation and the whole apprenticeship system. So I hope that explains a little bit about apprenticeship endpoint assessment, why it's so important, what the changes are in the rules, i.e. that now it is only 20% of the negotiated rate, and the need therefore to ensure that your endpoint assessment organisation is clear on how much they can charge and they should be involved in those negotiations. And those are the key points about end assessment that everybody needs to be aware of. So thanks very much. I hope that was a helpful 3-5 minutes, however long it's taken. Thanks everybody.